Call the meeting to order of the Senate Fed and State Committee. We have a lot of work to do this morning, but we did have one bill that was going to be introduced today. We are going to introduce that tomorrow. Are there any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on our schedule. The first item on the agenda is a hearing on Senate Bill 108, which is creating a Veterans Benefit Lottery Game Fund and transferring the money to the veterans programs. And we'll have a staff briefing. Jason Long, are you on the camera? There you go.
Yes.
Up there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. You should have a memo from our office in your bill packet summarizing Senate Bill 108. Under current law 74-8724, the lottery is directed to provide a lottery game for the benefit of veterans organizations. And under that current law, the profits from that lottery game are to be used for the benefit by the Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. What Senate Bill 108 would do would establish a separate Veterans Benefit Lottery Game Fund in the state treasury to be administered by the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. The monies in that fund would still be utilized in the same manner and the same proportion as under current law. That is 40% would be spent for the Kansas National Guard Educational Assistance Act scholarships. 30% would be spent for operational expenses of the Kansas Veterans Home, Kansas Soldiers Home, and the State Veterans Cemetery System. And then the final 30% would be spent for the Veterans Enhanced Service Delivery Program. That remains unchanged under Senate Bill 108. The primary change is that instead of funding the fund with the profits from the lottery game, which can vary from year to year, there would instead be an annual transfer of $2 million from the lottery operating fund to the Veterans Benefit Lottery Game Fund. So it would be a fixed $2 million each year going into that Veterans Benefit Fund to be used for those programs. And then the bill provides that beginning July 1st of 2022 and each year after that, the amount to be transferred would increase by 5%. So there would be an annual increase on that transfer amount as well. The bill does also provide for a 5-year review of the statute and the Veterans Benefit Lottery Game Fund by the Committee on Veterans and Military in the House of Representatives. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year if enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jason. Is there any questions? Yes, Senator Ks.gov.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. So is there a measure or piece in the bill that lists what that $2 million, that fund would be used for?
Yes, Senator, it's the same purposes that the profits are currently used for. On page 3 of the bill, in the middle of the page, subsection D, you see that the new language at the beginning is the $2 million transfer language, but then it follows that such monies would be used for, and then you have old language there under current law, which is the same 40% for the Kansas National Guard scholarships, 30% for the Veterans and Soldiers Homes and the cemetery system, and then 30% for the Enhanced Service Delivery Program. So the uses would not change. We're simply earmarking a fixed amount to be transferred to that fund rather than have it simply be funded by the profits from the lottery game.
Further questions? Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for clarification, Jason, so both funds would still exist, and both monies would be used?
No, under current law, there are profits from the lottery game that are used for these purposes. We're replacing that funding system with an actual fund in the state treasury that's funded with a demand transfer, we call it demand transfer of $2 million the first year to fund those programs. We're just changing the system of funding for those same programs.
Any further questions? Jason, I have one, and that is on the bottom there, you said beginning on July 1st, 2022, and each year thereafter, the fund transfer will increase by 5%. Is there a possibility that we could have a negative transfer from the gaming so that we could lose money on this?
The money comes out of the lottery operating fund, which is basically the revenues fund for the Kansas lottery for all their lottery games. And so it would have to be a substantially bad year for the Kansas lottery, I think, for that to be a negative transfer. And I think we have statutes and rules in place that limit demand transfers if the funds simply aren't in there to transfer. I would let the lottery probably speak more on that, but I think $2 million would be well under what the lottery holds in its operating fund.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if we could, from research, get a history of how much the lottery game itself has earned each year over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, so that we could see how much of additional money is going to be need to put in on top of that to match the $2 million plus 5%.
Jason, could you get that for us?
Yeah, we can work with Joanna over at KLRD and get that information on what the profits have been over the last 5 years based on the Veterans Lottery game.
The question that I had, and maybe I'm not understanding this properly, but this is a new Veterans Benefit Lottery game. Is that correct?
No, the game itself has been a requirement in statute. It's a current requirement. All this bill is doing is changing the funding mechanism for getting the money from those games out of the lottery and to the Commission on Veterans Affairs to be spent for these programs. Under current law, it's simply the profits that are derived from those games are then used, which my understanding fluctuates up and down on an annual basis, and we can get that information for the committee. This would create some stability on that funding by just having a fixed annual transfer into this new fund. And so we had to establish a new fund to have that transfer operate within the state treasury.
Thank you for that explanation. Is there any further questions? Jason? If not, thank you, Jason. We'll move on. Proponent, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee, for hearing this bill. I know there are a lot of questions. I had the same amount of questions when I was on the Military and Veterans Committee in the House over the last 3 years when the lottery came in and explained this particular operation that happens. We do have fixed in statute certain provisions that when the lottery is put in place, they go to these veterans programs, to the National Guard, and they do help finance a lot of great programs. When they came to us, the committee was in the habit of looking at the actual lottery tickets. Let's say they had a military lottery ticket and it had Honor Our Veterans a lottery ticket, and would get very particular about whether they were being placed out inside of the kiosks, if they were placed in the right position, what the lottery game was. And the lottery came to the committee and said, look, we're transferring about 1.2 million to 1.4 million. It goes down to 900,000, it goes up to 1.5 million. And it's all based on these 3 or 4 tickets that we're selling across the state of Kansas. And that's the way it was put in place. They said that this is not working really well. And the reason it wasn't working well is because the variation inside of the money coming in was hard for the agencies to budget on. So if they were counting on 1.2 from last year, it became 900,000. If it was 1.5, it goes down to 1.2. And they said, look, why don't you let us, the lottery people, maximize the profits always put some military, but we're here to tell you that those are not performing as well as you might want them to, because some of the players out there want to maximize their chance of winning, and they feel sometimes there's psychological inhibition because they feel like some of that money is going to go away to other things, other causes like military causes and veterans causes. So they said, let us maximize our profits the way we know how and set up a fixed amount that we would transfer over as part of the same percentages, and we'll put that at 2 million, which is more than they typically historically had received, which was a great thing for these particular causes. And so as a committee, we pushed this out. It didn't actually hit the floor because of some lottery challenges that we might have amendments on, but it's a pretty straightforward bill. It could even hit a consent calendar on this, because we already do this in our provisos. It's the same amount we authorized in our budget over the last 2 years. So instead of having the bill modify the statute, we just authorized a proviso. Both the House and the Senate passed that. So it's the same, it reflects that same $2 million we're actually currently transferring right now. The one thing that's additional is it changes the statute, and it doesn't allow for a 5% increase each year to keep up with just, funds and inflation and that type of thing. So I strongly urge you to consider this, pass it out of committee, think about putting on the consent calendar, as we're already doing that, and it really does benefit a lot of good military organizations. And so with that, I can stand for questions now or afterward.
Any questions? Senator Hillbrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Pittman, for your offering this bill. It's definitely a worthwhile bill to look at, but I do have a couple questions. On page 4, line 4, it says beginning in 2026 and every 5 years thereafter, the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Veterans and Military or its successor committee shall review the provisions of this section. You don't want the Senate to review it, just the House, or?
Well, the Senate has so many worthy things that we do with our time, and we do appointments on an ongoing basis. I felt like they should actually step up and take some of that workload off our backs.
And then on the line right above that, on the 5%, is that in perpetuity, or does it end, or?
I would say that on a 5-year time period, if it were to get exorbitant, it is in perpetuity. It's 5% each year. When we reviewed it with the Lottery Commission a year or two ago, they were fine with that. I mean, they make vastly much more money than this. And a 5% increase, it could be 2%. It was just something so that we didn't have to revisit in the statutes and try and update it every 2 or 3 years. But the bill would be just as well without that, I think, for the next 4 or 5 years. And so if we were to take that out, that would be absolutely, acceptable to me as well as a lot of other folks.
I was just curious if maybe the cost of inflation would be better put in there.
Probably.
Than 5%. Thank you.
Yep.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Sir.
Next proponent, I have Mr. Greg Burton, Director of the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Can I take off my mask? It just makes it a little easier. Thanks for this opportunity. We support this bill completely. This gives us an opportunity to increase revenues for important funding for our Kansas veterans. I can answer probably a lot of the questions that you have. I was the instigator of this, working with the lottery a number of years ago. In regards to the 5% increase, that was offered out by the lottery about 3 or 4 years ago, before it was put into a proviso. And they agreed to that. They thought that was a good starting point, but they also thought it would be good to have it as part of the review process. We think it's the $2 million is a generous amount, and it's very predictable. Where before it was fluctuating so much, there was no way to really budget, because it would fluctuate up to $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and we don't have a huge budget, and that amount was extremely critical for us. So if there is a cost of living increase or a set amount, that would be sincerely appreciated, because our costs continue to go up. But no, this was worked on a number of years ago with the previous adjutant general, the previous lottery director, and our agency, and been trying to push it through for a few years. We want to get it out of the proviso into statute. and I can stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're always so helpful. Sir, thank you. So just, yeah, I know Jason Long said it's in the bill, but just tell me just a few of the things that the monies would be used for. Scholarships, I mean,
I
yeah.
can't, 40% goes to the National Guard Scholarship Fund. That's on the National Guard side. It's transferred directly over to the Board of Regents. They have a fund that helps sponsor that. We're not involved with that. The money does come to us, but then it's distributed to them. For us, we get 60% of it, 30% for veteran services. We got our mobile vans. We've got our offices around the state. It helps fund those projects. And then the other 30% is for our 2 veterans home in our cemeteries. And so these are vital monies to keep these operations going. They're part of our budget that we need to continue our operations. And so that's why the fixed amount is so important to us. And if there is an increase each year, our costs continue to go up and it just benefits us. So whatever we can get is welcome relief. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Colonel Burton, for being here. That 40% for the National Guard to scholarships or tuition, does that cover it, or have you been needing more than that 40%?
You'd have to ask the National Guard. I'm not an expert. That's, we just transfer the money to them. The money goes to them, and we're not involved. But that's only from what I know, that's only a portion of the money that they use.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
It doesn't cover the entire amount.
No. That's just I think it's just a relatively small portion of it. I can't remember the total amount.
That's a great question. If we could ask that tomorrow, because the Adjutant General will be here tomorrow. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony today. We appreciate it.
Time and support.
There's a written support in your packet by Representative Chris Croft. If there's no other question, yes. Oh, yes. Senator, Representative Croft, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee. So last year, when this bill was going through the House, or actually 2 years ago, I was on the committee for this and in big support of it. One thing that, as you were already bringing up in this discussion, is this money, as you talk about, what you're doing now is giving stability to the process. If you're talking about just the scholarships themselves, you're now enabling the TAG to go out and set, here's the plan, this is how we're going to go out and do it, and come back in. And so right now, they're out there talking to folks and saying, hey, we might have scholarship money, we might have this, because they don't know the actual figure. This actually locks it in for them and enables them to do a better job recruiting. And we know right now this is a tough recruiting environment. This is times that we need to get out there and take that piece away from them. Just so you also know is that in 2019, before COVID, we had a strategy session with the veterans community here in this building. It had 27 VSOs, veteran service organizations, had over 75 people at the governor's office. We had the commerce secretary. We had all the folks in there, and we gave them, they came out with a list of their top 10. This was number 6 on their top 10, and number 1 was the veterans homes. So the recruiting and then the veterans homes, number 1, number 6. So this is very important to the veterans community out there. And reference the comment that was made by the vice chair. I do recommend on the House side that we do amend this and add in that the author of the bill is added to the review committee. If you'd like to do that, we can do that on our side. Okay. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comments? Yes, Senator Falscadeau.
Not actually a question, a comment. Representative Chris Croft, good to see you outside of a reception. No, Mr. Chairman, it's like whenever I see the gentleman, I've always thought that he was a representative from Congress, from D.C., but I would see him out at dinner. Thank you. It's all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Excuse me. That closes the hearing on Senate Bill 108. And we'll move on to Senate Bill 109. And this bill is requiring the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs to submit an initial application for a VA state veterans home construction grant. And we have a staff briefing. Jason Long.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you also should have a memo from our office on Senate Bill 109. Real briefly, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs administers a grant program for constructing new veterans homes, and they provide financial assistance for that construction. But they require that the state has to apply, obviously, for that grant program. And so Senate Bill 109 would direct the director of the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs office to submit an initial application for a grant under that program by April 15th of 2022. And the bill further requires that that new facility be constructed in Douglas, Jefferson, Leavenworth, Shawnee, or Wyandotte County. So focusing on the northeast counties in Kansas. The bill will go into effect July 1st of this year if enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason, for that. Would you tell us where the other two veterans homes are located?
I do not have that information off the top of my head. I am hoping that the director probably has that information.
I will give you for that. I'll give you a hint on that. It's located in Cali County, one of those, and the other is in Ford County in Dodge City. So thank you very much. I want to make sure that people know that those are located outside the metro areas and outside of the counties which are listed here. So with that, thank you very much for that, proponent. Is there any further questions? Yes, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the grants, do we know what percentage it pays for new construction?
No, well, I can check on what I know the state is required to provide matching funds for that grant, but I'm not sure what the proportions are. We'll check on that and get back to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, proponent, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. This is near and dear to my heart. My dad's a two-time Vietnam veteran. My father-in-law is a four-time Vietnam veteran. I know that if they had fallen on hard times, I would want them to have access to a facility like the one we're proposing in Northeast Kansas. We do have two homes. The genesis of this bill, there was a lot of veteran service organizations, once again originated inside of that committee, had come in and said, look, we really want to see Kansas provide, step up for the veterans more than they felt they had. There's a lot of veterans organizations that were clamoring for a new veterans home, and being a new rookie freshman, I didn't quite know the process, but after a couple of years, we realized that I believe, Senator, it's a 65% match from the feds, 35% on mine. I might have that number off right now, but I think that's the number that we're looking at. And so we started looking at the concentration of veterans in the state of Kansas, and a huge concentration is in Northeast Kansas. And while Winfield is a fantastic facility, and we have the one in Fort Dodge, we don't have as many veterans wanting to go all the way down there from the northeast quadrant of the state. And so a lot of veterans organizations in the area said, well, why don't we have one up here? And we have other facilities in the area. We have the Eastern VA system. Mr. Joe Burks, the PR director, is here. He did submit written testimony that the VA is fully supportive of this. We've had some communications with the federal side that have said, this sounds very interesting to us. What happens is we need to get ourselves on a list, though. And when we looked at the list as a committee, it was about 600 or 700 projects. When we can actually establish that we can pay our portion when our time comes, that elevates us to the up the list significantly. They have tier 1, tier 1A, and it would put us in that top tier of categories. So with that, this bill, Senate Bill 109, has a companion funding bill of 110 that's sitting over in Ways and Means, and there are mirror bills in the House Bill 2020 and 2021. House Bill 2021 and 110, basically, they simply, established that we have bonding authority for our portion of this veteran's home. It's about 13 to 17 million is what's been estimated. And that we would have the bonding authority to issue bonds for the construction of the home. And that would establish that we have a funding mechanism for when the federal VA looks at our loan application. So ideally, these two would be together, but because we wanted to push the idea, we've actually separated those out into a funding mechanism and an actually direction to the administration that we as a legislature feel the administration needs to get on this list and put themselves out there on the list. We can get on the list without the funding and we'll stay at the, in the midsection, but if we can get both of these passed with a funding mechanism or an appropriation, I don't think we should do that at this time, but a future appropriation for that amount, then we can actually move ourselves up that list. I'm going to let the other folks, I would encourage this, I know that it was written only by Joe Burks, but he is here present if there is time to talk to this at the end. He does have some testimony on this. And as far as the locations, there is property available, I know in Leavenworth, on the VA property that's being, they said that that's probably going to be a good possibility we can use. There's property in Topeka that's available. So we decided not to have that discussion about where exactly it needs to be until we actually find that we actually get the funding from the feds. So with that, I'll stand for questions, but I think you should use this time to actually talk to some of the other conferees as well.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes, Senator Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Pittman. Just a quick question. I think this is the first time I've seen a bill where there's no opponents. Did you have any opposition or at all?
I've not seen opposition on this concept in the last 2 years in terms of, I mean, it's it's just directing the administration to do this.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Sir.
Mr. Greg Burton, back up again.
It's good to be back. We're a big proponent of this bill. This is something that's, it's the most asked questions by veterans or request is a new veterans home in the northeast part of Kansas, and we're fully behind it. We don't really care where it goes, but it needs to be in the northeast part of Kansas. One of the questions was about the split. It's a 35-65 split. The state is in for the 35, and then the Fed VA pays up to 65%. So it's a pretty good bang for the buck for a new facility. People are asking, they're looking at around a $50 million facility is what's being kicked around. There was recently, in the last year and a half or two, there was a home that was finished up in Minnesota that was a 72-bed long-term care facility that was in the mid-40s. Similar type of construction, we're looking around the same. Could be anywhere up to 72. We just look for anything. Anymore, they're building modular type of facilities where, or different pods. And my hope is that when we get the ground and we develop and build this, that we build so many pods, but then have the ability to add on to it. I think that's a smart way of doing business to make sure that the numbers and the need is there as you grow. And I think that there is a huge need and the ability to grow in the future. My hope, and like I said, is that it's a long-term care facility. I think that's where the need is going to be. The assisted living domiciliary has been waning. It's actually been going down, and the reimbursement is very, very low for that. If there was a need, I'd be a huge proponent of it, but we just haven't seen the need. Most of our vacancies are in the domiciliary area. We tend to fill up or come close to filling up and maintaining our long-term care facility. And I want to make sure if we build something that is full, that we maintain it's full. I think I was just going to throw out a couple of numbers here. Here in the state, we've got about 194,000 veterans, depending on which website you look at. Of those, age 65 and older, there's right around 92,000 age 65 and older in the state of Kansas. But if you divide Kansas up into 4 quadrants, that northeast quadrant of the state a number of years ago had right around 50,000 of those 92,000 veterans. So you can see, you know, the veterans are congregated in the eastern third of the state, and mostly in the northeastern part, and you've got a huge number that, you know, right around 50,000, age 65 and above, and the needs out there. I think this is something that's important. This process, a lot of people ask, how long does it take? Once you get on the list, it doesn't guarantee anything. They have a way of racking and stacking and prioritizing all this, and they get different amounts of money each year on the federal side. And then they go down the list and fund as many as they can. So if this is passed, we would put in an initial application next April is when it's due, the initial application, and then the rest of the application, as long as the funding's there, would go in at the end of, well, it'd be in August, and then the following year, about a year later, is when the next list would come out. Then you've got probably a 3 to 5 year process to build the facility, to go through the whole process. So this can take 4 to 5, 6, 7 years. You could be on that list. Once you're on it, you can stay on that list for a number of years and you may move up. They're trying to build new nursing homes strategically around the country. I think this would be a great benefit to Kansas. I think it would look good at the federal VA as an opportunity to help veterans in Kansas. So I think it would get a relatively high priority when they look at it. So that's my pitch for right now. I stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions? I will say I visited both veterans homes in Dodge and also Winfield. You do a great job out there.
Thank you very much. We're very proud of the services that we provide and want to continue to provide those services to our deserving veterans. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next proponent, and forgive me if I mess up the name, Jim Carleton. Jim? Not here? Okay, he's not here. We had one that came in late last night, and Joseph Burks. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Senator Ali, and the rest of you, just for giving me a couple minutes to speak on this. You do have my written testimony. I'm Joseph Burks. I'm spokesman for VA Eastern Kansas Healthcare System. And while Mr. Burton laid out a lot of the state in the demographics and the data, we cover about 20,000 square miles throughout in eastern, northeastern Kansas. We take care of about 40,000 enrolled veterans. We have 2 medical centers, one in Topeka, one in Leavenworth. And that would be not why we're here to choose where, but I'm able to tell you that we are in full support of this at VA Eastern Kansas. We have the history where veterans started in 1880 on our campus. There's a cemetery there. We have 5-star nursing homes there right now. And just over the last couple of weeks, we were in some very strong conversations about closing one of our community living centers, with Leavenworth being on there. As this conversation continues, we made that decision to keep that community living center open. Even though some finances are changing in VA with community care, we are leaving that open, and this is a big reason why we're leaving that open. The community living center there could be a direct feed to a veteran's home at some point. So again, we're in support of that. We have an enhanced use lease program on our campus, which allows us to build for less than what you would off of that campus. And Rick Creedy, Pioneer Group, has done that with 40 buildings on our campus thus far. So as they're renovating them, increasing them, they're paying pennies on the dollar to do that. So that would be an opportunity for us right there in Leavenworth. And then, finally, since 1880, the campus has been there, and it was bought with $60,000 and raised by elected officials just like you. So we have an opportunity today to not just pass a bill or talk about pushing a bill forward in maybe the next 5 to 7 years, but we have a chance to leave our legacy behind in taking care of veterans right there in a home. That I believe they need. Cemeteries right there as well. So a park-like atmosphere gives them the opportunity to come home before being called home. I'll gladly answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Senator Falscadone.
I like that slogan, come home before being called home. Sir, quick question. So the veterans home, who would operate this with?
So it would be state-run. And again, if it's pulled into the Northeast area, Mr. Burton is the subject matter expert on that. But with VA care, veteran care, we would be a direct feeder to that. And we don't have one in Northeast Kansas. We do have 2 across the state, far south, far west. Missouri has 7 veteran homes. We need something to balance out the geographical area, the 90,000 plus veterans throughout Kansas, and the large majority being in that Northeast Kansas area. So,
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony today. We do have written support. You see there, it should be in your packet. So if there are no further, yes, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second time. If possible, I do have one local who represents one of the VSOs, the VFW commander. Would you allow him to speak he's here with us. Would you allow him to speak for just maybe 60 seconds on this?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. His name is Ken Romine.
Yes. Welcome to the committee.
I thought I got it in on time. I guess I did not. Probably. Thanks, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm currently the VFW commander out of Leavenworth, Kansas. I'm also operate a nonprofit called Operation Rapid Response that we put together in 2019 in response to the amount of homeless veterans and veterans in need in the state of Kansas. I'm also a retired veteran who has defended our country as well as in Iraq. I'm here today in support of SB 109 and ask for the administration to apply for the cost to share priority from the federal VA for a new state-sponsored veterans home in Northeast Kansas. The Leavenworth has an active VFW chapter, and it has numerous active veteran service organizations and nonprofits who organize regularly in support of veterans in need and homeless veterans. Locally, we have provided food, shelter. We help veterans find their benefits, publicize the Veterans Mobile Unit to ensure our veterans are taken care of. There is a huge number of veterans in our community that need help. So much that you say helping our veterans is in our blood. We truly stand by that. We also recognize that there is 2 other veterans' homes, and we're grateful for that. And I know those veterans that use those are grateful for that as well. However, with such a concentration of veterans is in the Northeast, we feel that it's appropriate and we request that we position our veterans' home as outdated and that we need to provide support in the Northeast Kansas. Kansas veterans served our nation when our nation needed them. Many saw direct combat and have issues and concerns that need to be addressed today. However, I know this bill is going to take 5 to 7 years to get done. However, if we don't start today, it will not be able to keep pushing that number out further. 5 to 7 years from today will be 5 to 7 years from next year, and continue and so forth and so on. One constant theme I hear around all the veteran service organizations and nonprofits is that we should do more as Kansas to help our veterans. This is a huge step by allowing this bill to pass and to help it, and it shows our veterans of Kansas that we do care. Kansas cares about those who signed up and gave their all. It shows you that as legislators, you really do care as well. Care about our military heroes that go out and defend our nation at a moment's notice. And when they come home, we're there to support them. It would allow for us to do more for our veterans who have served across the great state of Kansas. A lot of veterans are homeless. You heard the numbers of veterans, but what number you didn't hear is over 500 veterans a night are homeless and need support, and those are the only ones that will actually self-report or go ask for help. So out of those veterans, that's a low percentage that are actually out there. They need dietary service. They need local support. And we all know a lot of veterans need psychological help. With your support, we could do more to help those veterans, and I ask for you to push this.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony today. That will close the hearing on Senate Bill 109, and we'll move into Senate Bill 190, which is creating a Kansas Protection of Firearms Rights Act to restore the right to possess a firearm upon expungement of certain convictions. And we have a staff briefing. Jason?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you will have a memo from our office summarizing Senate Bill 190 in front of you. Under current law, there's a criminal statute 21-6304 that makes it a level 8 non-person felony for an individual to possess a weapon, which includes a firearm or a knife, if they've been convicted of a felony in the past. And generally, an expungement of that prior felony does not restore the individual's ability to lawfully possess firearms. What Senate Bill 190 would do first is reverse that policy on the expungement. And so the bill does amend the expungement statute 21-6614 to provide that expungement of that prior felony conviction does restore the individual's ability to lawfully purchase, transport, and possess firearms in the state of Kansas. And the bill further provides that the expungement exempts the individual from being convicted under the firearm possession statute 21-6304 for possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. So the expungement truly means that the felony never occurred and isn't on the individual's record anymore. Senate Bill 190 also amends that possession by a convicted felon criminal statute 21-6304 to change the prior felony convictions that would lead to a conviction of a violation of that statute. And so under current law, there are 4 categories of felony convictions that would prohibit the individual from possessing a weapon. First, if they committed a person felony or a felony violation of a controlled substances criminal statutes, and they were in possession of a firearm at the time the crime was committed, that is a lifetime prohibition on possessing a weapon. The second category there is if they committed a serious person felony, and in this category, we're talking about murder, assault, battery, rape, or violations of controlled substances criminal statutes within the last 10 years, but were not in possession of a firearm at the time the crime was committed, then they're prohibited from possessing a weapon. So there's only a 10-year window if they weren't possessing a firearm. If they were possessing a firearm under these felonies, then it's a lifetime prohibition on possessing a weapon because of that felony conviction. The other 2 classes are for other felonies. If it's a non-person felony, other non-person felony in the last 10 years, and they were in possession of the firearm, then they're prohibited from carrying a weapon. And then any other felony in the last 5 years, if they were not in possession of a firearm, they're prohibited. So those are the other 2 categories with their time limits there of 10 years and 5 years. Senate Bill 90 would remove some of those classifications. So under the bill, the only categories of prior felonies that would prohibit a person from possessing a weapon are the first one, the person felony, violations of controlled substances, if the defendant actually used the firearm in the commission of the crime. So not merely having it in the defendant's possession, but actually using it in the commission of the crime would result in a lifetime prohibition on carrying a firearm or knife. The other category Senate Bill 190 would preserve is the serious person felonies and the controlled substances in the last 10 years. if the defendant wasn't in possession of the firearm. So if they didn't have a firearm on them, but they did commit one of those serious felonies in the last 10 years, then they would have a prohibition on carrying within that 10-year window. So it just narrows down those categories. The other two categories I mentioned are being stricken entirely under Senate Bill 190. Bill will go into effect on July 1st of 2021. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Jason, is there any questions? Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so would there be any type of requirement to restore one to possess a firearm?
Under the bill, the court order expunging the prior felony conviction would be the documentation the individual would need to have their firearm rights restored under this bill.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Our first proponent, Mr. Chris Kobach. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to see you all again, and it just seems like things have been so strange this year, not running into people like we used to. But I'm happy to talk with you a little bit this morning about this bill. I'm here before you not as a former Secretary of State, but really as a former law professor, which I did before I became Secretary of State, and then as an attorney who's practiced in this area of firearms law. And basically, SB 190 is a fix-it bill. It's designed to correct an unintended problem in Kansas law, and I'll explain in detail and answer your questions on that. Just by the way, though, this bill was introduced in the 2017 Senate session in the Senate, and it passed unanimously out of committee in 2017. And then, you know how bills sometimes fall through the cracks. It just got left on the table and never was brought to the floor for a vote. Other things were more important that year, I guess. But it was bipartisan support back then, and I hope it would have the same this year. Basically, the way I can explain it is the bill makes three corrections. It corrects three problems in Kansas law. First of all, right now in Kansas law, an expungement isn't really an expungement. And let me explain that. So an expungement, and this goes to your question, Senator Falscadeau, that's what you need right now if you want to get, you've committed one of these felonies and you want to get your firearms rights restored. An expungement works this way. It erases the crime, or at least it's supposed to erase this crime. In Kansas law, it states after the order of expungement is entered, the petitioner shall be treated as not having been convicted of the crime. That's in current Kansas law right now. But then there are a bunch of exceptions to that. And the way the federal government has read our Kansas law, the federal government has read it as, you know what, you've got all these exceptions, and expungement really isn't an expungement in Kansas. To get an expungement, you the defendant, have to petition the convicting judge, the judge under whom you were convicted. The judge has to agree that your behavior has been exemplary in the last 5 years. You pose no threat to the community. It is in the general interest of the community that you get the crime expunged. And as a practical matter, the prosecutor also has to agree. The prosecutor is notified, and expungements usually don't happen unless the prosecutor also agrees that this person is not a threat. They should have their rights, their crime erased from their record. So it's not easy to get. Expungements are not, they don't happen automatically. But as I mentioned, there are some exceptions to the expungement law that kind of make sense. For example, if you want to get a job in law enforcement, your police agency that you're applying to for a job has a right to look back, even though that crime was erased, look back and see, see the circumstances of the crime. But what happens in most, and those exceptions make sense, but often what happens now is a person is charged with a relatively low-level crime. You know, we're not talking about murder here or anything like that. A relatively low-level crime. Usually it's a person who's never committed any crimes in the past. They're not career criminals. They go to the prosecutor and they say, look, I want to just make sure I can hunt in the future, or I can, possess a firearm to defend myself in the future. And the prosecutors oftentimes, unknowingly, will say, okay, tell you what, after 5 years, if everything's good and nothing has changed, we will agree to petition the court to expunge your crime. We will agree with your petition to expunge the crime. And so oftentimes the defendant pleads guilty knowing that, okay, at least I get my firearms rights back in 5 years. But unbeknownst to the prosecutor, he wasn't intentionally lying. In Kansas, an expungement doesn't actually work that way. It's not effective, because when he goes, he tries to purchase a firearm at a gun store and does the InstaCheck, the CJIS office of the federal government will come back, and they won't come back with a quick answer. They'll come back several weeks later and they'll say, after looking at the law, we can't grant your right to have a firearm because Kansas law doesn't restore your firearms rights. And so basically, this allows the prosecutors to be honest when they offer, they're not intentionally dishonest, but when that deal happens right now, people will often plead guilty thinking, well, at least I'm getting my firearms rights back, and that's really all I care about, or that's one of the things I care most about, because there may not be a hefty prison sentence. And so on page 9 of the bill, that's why there's the language added, the person shall be deemed to have had such person's right to keep and bear arms fully restored. The second thing that the bill does is it clarifies the lifetime bar language. There is this language that was mentioned by the revisor's office where you have a lifetime bar on ever possessing a firearm for the rest of your life. And the statute right now is a little bit ambiguous. It says it requires that the individual have committed one of these crimes, number one, and number two, the individual, quote, was found to have been in possession of a firearm at the time of the commission of the crime, end quote. Now, to most lawyers and to most legislators, found, the verb found is something a judge does. A judge renders findings and was found at the time, it's past tense, to have committed the crime. So the way most of us would read that law is that means that the convicting judge rendered a factual finding that you committed that crime using a firearm. But the problem is it doesn't say found by the convicting judge, it just says was found. And as a result, some have interpreted that law, some officials, including in the concealed carry unit, have interpreted that law as, well, I'm an official today and I can sift through the record and see if there's any mention of a firearm. And if I can find a mention of a firearm somewhere in the record, then I can find it today, even though the convicting judge didn't find it. And as a result, you have people finding out surprised, oh, wait a minute, I'm told by I applied for a concealed carry permit, I'm told by the Attorney General's office, the CCLU, under our statute, find doesn't mean found by the judge. We can find it today. And so the person's in uncertainty as to whether he lost his right to bear arms or he didn't lose the right to bear arms. And so what this bill does is clarify, it says was found by the convicting court. And I think that's obviously what the intention of the legislature was. I think this was written in the 80s or 90s. You know, it was intended based on the way it looks to be the convicting court, but there is an ambiguity. And then the third thing the law does, and this was also mentioned by the revisor's office, is it makes clear that if the lifetime bar is going to affect you and prevent you from possessing a firearm for the rest of your life, you have to have used the firearm in whatever relevant crime. Right now, that language is somewhat vague. It just says possessed. And so to give you an example, suppose a person is drunk driving or runs into something, gets drunk and gets behind the wheel and is potentially guilty of multiple crimes. And suppose that when the officer comes up to him, he tells the officer when they're discussing things, oh, by the way, I do carry a firearm in the glove compartment of the car, because maybe the officer says, do you have a gun in the car? And he tells the officer. So in the notes that the officer writes in the arrest record, the officer would note, gun in the glove box of the car. Well, that potentially could mean that the individual committed the crime while possessing a gun. Now, clearly, the intent of the legislature wasn't to say, if there's a gun anywhere within reach, you never get to bear arms again. But that's the way it's being interpreted right now by some. And the other part is it's ambiguous. And we just want to make clear that, no, if you used the gun, that's where the lifetime bar on the possession of firearms comes in. So SB 190 solves this problem by clarifying that merely possessing but not using doesn't trigger the lifetime bar. And that gives clarity not only to the judges, to the prosecutors. Now the prosecutors can say, yes, an expungement is truly an expungement. And in your case, you didn't actually use the firearm, so you may not need to worry about it. But it gives clarity to the gun owner, because I have found in practicing law in this area, a lot of people are completely surprised, including prosecutors, of whether the person still has gun rights or doesn't have gun rights. So this makes what I think the original intent of the legislature was. An expungement really is an expungement. You are restored to your right to bear arms. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chris Kobach, good to see you again. I've heard from you many years serving on the Ethics and Elections Committee, and so whether I agreed or not, you always explain the legislation very well, so thank you. Would you be in favor of, so let's say that 190 passes to help restore and alleviate some of those concerns or misunderstandings you just shared. Would you be in favor of those that have, or everybody, having a working lockbox, gun lockbox in their home, to whereas, you know, you've got a thumbprint to open that lockbox, then let's say that there's a domestic violence situation and so where, you know, you could have a domestic violence situation, but a gun wasn't used. And you could prove that because the gun's in that lockbox that, yeah, I mean, there's been situations where the lock has been broken and things have occurred. Any comment on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you suggesting maybe, would it be okay to amend this, or are you just saying in general, how do I feel about that, or okay. Well, I think in terms of amending it, I don't think we are at that point technologically yet where fingerprint lock boxes are. I have a safe, and I'm sure many people have safes, and I can barely get the thing to work with the code. And the fingerprinting technology it's out there, but it's not widely available. Like if you walked into a Cabela's or Academy Sports or something, you wouldn't find a whole bunch of fingerprint and activated safes yet. I think maybe we will be there down the road, and then people could start saying, okay, could think creatively about it. If you had one of these safes, how could we write it into the law that it would give you some assurance that the safe was never opened? Or I think that's where you're going. So I would say we're probably not there technologically yet to start writing that into the law. And the other thing you'd have to think about too is when those safes do become, and lock boxes become widely available, they're probably going to be really expensive. You know what I mean? They'll be 5 times the price of a normal one. So you wouldn't want to price people into a situation where only some people get to enjoy certain benefits, but people who have the ordinary safe don't. So those are just 2 thoughts I have, but I would say we're not quite there yet.
More?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, well, except Wichita, we do things like, so there was some community events where some of those were being given out to people. And so I actually have, I don't know why I don't own but anyway, I've got a few in my car actually still. So I don't know, I'm just always looking at giving people their rights. Oh, yeah. But at the same time, advocating for safety, because I mentioned that there was a case in Wichita that Mark Bennett, the district attorney there, he struggled on how to handle it, where an 8 and 9-year-old were at a play date and the lockbox was broken, and the 9-year-old killed the 8-year-old accidentally because they were able to get into it. So anyway, we thought that thumbprint might be good, and I see it on both, because you gave the example, and it's here in the legislation that Jason Long gave, that just because you own a gun and it's there, you shouldn't be charged with that. You didn't use it, just be charged with the crime that you committed. And so I was just looking for, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know the safe giveaway you were talking about. I remember hearing about it and thinking, I hope I could get down to Wichita in time to get one, but I didn't make it. I think it was Range 54 or something like that was doing that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for testimony today.
Thank you all. Great to see you.
Our next proponent is Mr. Jason Watkins. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Watkins appearing today for the Kansas State Rifle Association. We just wanted to be on record in support of this legislation. We think it's important. We think it's common sense. We'd urge you to pass it. I've tried to make a career out of not repeating what conferees said before me. I'm going to stick to that today. So I'm happy to stand for questions, but we do urge that you report the bill favorable for passage.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Watkins, same question as I asked Mr. Chris Kobach.
Yeah, I don't know that I would disagree or have anything to add to what the former secretary said. I do appreciate where your mind is going with that prospectively. So, and I also appreciate your comment that you, and I've known this to be true with you, you do care about people's rights and protecting those. And in this situation, we're trying to restore those, whereas most of their other rights have been restored.
Any further questions? Jason, thank you for being here today. So that will close the Senate Bill 190 hearing. Tomorrow, committee, we do have a confirmation hearing with, and that is on Colonel Michael, I'm going to mess this up again, Vernetti. And he's the Brigadier General and Director of Joint Staff at Kansas National Guard. And also a hearing on Senate Bill 181. So if you please bring your confirmation packets back with you. And any further questions or comments? We'll close the hearing. Thank you very much.